The summer heat baked down on the busy outdoor cafe in Charleston, South Carolina. People filled the tables, chatting and sipping iced drinks, their laughter mingling with the hum of passing traffic. Among them sat Jamal, a tall black man in his early 30s with a confident yet kind demeanor. Dressed sharply in a tailored navy suit, he radiated an air of quiet determination. Jamal was in town for a community leadership conference, and this afternoon he'd taken a rare break to enjoy a cup of coffee and a good book. He barely noticed when the murmur of voices around him quieted. "Excuse me," came a sharp voice, slicing through the warm air. Jamal looked up, puzzled. Standing before him was a woman in her mid-50s, her face a mask of disdain. She wore oversized sunglasses and clutched a designer handbag as if it were a shield. Around them, heads turned. A palpable tension filled the space. "You people," the woman sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Always coming here, taking over everything. Why don't you go back to Africa where you belong?" A stunned silence followed. The air seemed to freeze as diners looked from the woman to Jamal, waiting for his reaction. Jamal's heart thudded in his chest, but he didn't flinch. He had faced ignorance before, but this felt personal. Slowly, he closed his book and stood, towering over the woman. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "What did you just say?" "I said," she repeated with venom, "you don't belong here. People like you—" Jamal held up a hand, cutting her off. "I heard you the first time. Now, let me tell you something." He took a deep breath, his mind racing. His years of community work had taught him to turn moments like these into lessons. But the rawness of the insult stung. As he began to speak, his words resonated with a power that silenced even the faintest whispers in the cafe. "I was born in Detroit, Michigan," Jamal said, his voice steady. "My father was a firefighter who saved lives, and my mother was a teacher who shaped young minds. They taught me to love this country, even when it hasn't always loved me back." The woman's face flushed, but Jamal wasn't finished. "And Africa?" he continued, his voice rising slightly. "Africa is not just some place you use to demean people who look like me. It's the birthplace of humanity, the first heartbeat, the first step, the first spark of genius. So, thank you for reminding me of my connection to a land rich with culture, strength, and resilience." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some began clapping quietly. Jamal turned to the onlookers, his gaze sweeping the cafe. "But let's not forget," he said, his tone sharpening, "that moments like this are not just about me. They're about all of us. Every single time we allow hate to go unchecked, we lose a little bit of what makes us human." The woman, now visibly uncomfortable, tried to stammer a reply, but before she could, an older white man stood up from a nearby table. "Ma'am," he said, his southern drawl slow but deliberate, "I think you owe this gentleman an apology. And while you're at it, maybe rethink your idea of who belongs where. Because, frankly, you don't represent the values we stand for in this town, or this country." Applause erupted. The woman turned bright red, muttered something incoherent, and stormed off, her heels clicking angrily against the pavement. Jamal sat down, exhaling deeply. A young waitress approached him, her hands trembling slightly. "Sir," she said, placing a fresh coffee on his table. "This one's on the house. Thank you for saying what needed to be said." Jamal nodded, offering a small smile. "Thank you," he replied. Jamal sat in silence for a moment, the applause from the cafe still ringing in his ears. He stared at his untouched coffee, the adrenaline from the encounter leaving him feeling hollow. Around him, patrons began murmuring softly, their voices a mixture of support and reflection. A few people approached, offering words of encouragement or asking for a handshake. He obliged politely but kept his thoughts guarded. As the cafe returned to its usual buzz, a young woman with a notebook tentatively approached his table. She looked to be in her mid-20s with curly auburn hair and the kind of earnestness that was hard to ignore. "Mr. Jamal?" she began, her voice steady but tinged with hesitation. "I'm Clara. I'm a journalist for the Charleston Voice. I couldn't help but overhear what happened earlier. Would you be willing to share your thoughts? I think your story needs to be told." Jamal regarded her for a moment, unsure. While he appreciated the growing support around him, he wasn't sure he wanted to amplify the ugliness of the incident. Still, something in Clara's expression, a mixture of curiosity and determination, convinced him. "All right," he said, gesturing for her to sit. Clara flipped open her notebook, her pen poised. "Thank you. First, how did you stay so calm back there? Most people would have reacted differently." Jamal leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the bustling street beyond the cafe. "Calm isn't always my first instinct," he admitted. "But I've learned that anger only feeds the ignorance it's aimed at. My parents taught me to channel that energy into something constructive. They used to say, 'You can't fight hate with hate.'" Clara nodded, scribbling furiously. "And what do you hope people take away from this?" Jamal paused, considering his response. "I hope they realize that moments like today aren't isolated. Racism isn't just an individual problem, it's a societal one. It lives in the systems we've built, in the silence we keep, and in the stereotypes we let slide. But every time someone speaks up, every time we refuse to let hate win, we chip away at it. That's what I want people to see." Clara's pen stilled, her eyes meeting his. "That's powerful," she said softly. "Do you think the woman—" "Clara," Jamal interrupted gently. "This isn't about her. People like her exist everywhere. What matters is how the rest of us respond. We have the power to change the narrative." The interview concluded, and Clara promised to write an honest and thoughtful piece. As she left, Jamal felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. He picked up his coffee, now lukewarm, and took a sip. Before he could gather his things, an older black man in a straw hat approached, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "Son," the man said, his voice gravelly with age, "I saw what you did back there. Reminded me of something Dr. King once said, 'The time is always right to do what is right.' You did right today." Jamal felt a lump form in his throat. He shook the man's hand firmly. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." Later that night, as Jamal returned to his hotel room, he found himself scrolling through social media. The video of the incident had gained millions of views. Messages flooded his inbox, some from strangers thanking him for standing up, others sharing their own experiences with racism. One message, however, stood out. It was from a young boy named Malik, who wrote, "Mr. Jamal, I saw your video. I'm 12 years old and sometimes kids at school say mean things to me because I'm black. Today, I showed my mom your video, and she said I should be proud of who I am. Thank you for being brave." Jamal stared at the message, his eyes misting. He thought of himself at 12, struggling to find his place in a world that seemed determined to remind him of his differences. Malik's words reminded him why he did what he did. The next morning, Jamal attended the leadership conference as planned. When it was his turn to speak, he walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. But instead of diving into his prepared speech, he shared the story of what had happened at the cafe. "This isn't just my story," he told the audience. "It's ours. Every single one of us has a role to play in shaping the future. Whether it's standing up to hatred, educating others, or simply being kind. Change doesn't happen in silence. It happens when we choose to speak, to act, to love." The crowd erupted in a standing ovation. As Jamal stepped off the stage, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The woman's hateful words had been a spark, but his response had turned it into a flame he intended to keep alive, one story, one moment, one voice at a time. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a situation like this? How did you handle it, or how do you think people should respond to ignorance and hate? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this story and want to see more inspiring and thought-provoking content, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.